Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to the second session of Istanbul Innovation Days. My name is Jumana Saad and I'll be your moderator and host for today's session. This year's event is organized by EY in collaboration with UNDP under the theme Developments and its Futures. A timely topic considering that COVID-19 has redefined the importance of knowledge as a tool to become more agile and prepared as we deal with new challenges. Each of the 3 virtual sessions are building blocks in the IID journey. The events are called the Future Framing Sessions, powered by EY, and they are being anchored in 3 locations, Berlin, Dubai, and San Francisco, and they will be streamed in the week prior to the event. During the Berlin session yesterday, we took a closer look at the future of green economies and innovation. We tackled pressing challenges and discussed potential solutions that can lead us to a more inclusive and sustainable future global world, which puts the planet first. Yesterday's session kicked off with a fascinating discussion on uniting public and private sectors for collaboration and policy innovation for the green transformation. We heard in the panel about policy innovation in the development for climate challenge and about innovative uses of technology for transitioning to a green economy. Today, we keep this global conversation going in the Dubai session, which turns our attention to accelerating the future of knowledge. Over the next few hours, we will engage with thinkers and doers from across the Middle East to discover and accelerate paths for alternative development futures. By the end of the session, we will all have a much better idea of where we're at now, what the future of knowledge will look like, and how we can utilize knowledge as a building block for creating sustainable resilience. Before we officially kick off today's program, there are a few important things I'd like to bring to your attention. First, all participants tuning into the session are able to use the chat function where they can leave comments and questions for our speakers and panelists today. Also, please remember to use the hashtag #AccelerateTheFuture, IID21, and the future of development should you plan on posting about the event on social media. So without any further delay, I'd like to officially kick off today's program by introducing Julie Lentieglin, EMEA Area Managing Partner at Ernst & Young. Julie, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone, and a very warm virtual welcome to this session, which was originally planned to be held in Dubai. It's fantastic to be able to host you today and to work through together this future framing session powered by EY. The key focus for today is how we can accelerate knowledge to build better and sustainable resilience across the Middle East, North Africa, and globally. Knowledge development and innovation are critical to tackling issues and helping prevent future ones in a world of uncertainty and unknown risks. Today's session sits right within the Istanbul Innovation Days program and is part of the UNDP's innovation journey. This is the second of 3 sessions organized by the UNDP and EY, with Achim Steiner having opened the Berlin session yesterday and the next session being in San Francisco tomorrow. It's also great to see that the Mohammed bin Rashid Foundation is involved in today's session. You really do have a jam-packed agenda ahead of you. You know, working with Achim in the UNDP, it never ceases to amaze me how good and strong the UNDP's relationships and partnerships are with the private sector. For me, it's always an inspiration working and talking with the UNDP, so I'm really pleased and honored that we're co-organizing these sessions, including the ones we have today, which is focused on the future of knowledge. We're going to examine the future of knowledge as a building block for creating sustainable resilience. This is no easy topic to tackle, and it really cuts through some very big issues that are going to lead to significant transformations on how we approach things now and in the future. Looking at the world currently, this topic also triggers a couple of big questions that I encourage you to think about. Effectively, how can we move beyond the current pandemic to establish new ways of working and utilize knowledge to really shape our future? How do we leverage knowledge to better understand the signals of future risks so that we're better prepared to prevent them, better prepared to react even faster and more effective when they happen. I'd like to leave you with one thought, or a theme, better said, that came out of our EY study on megatrends. And I think it's a theme really worth bearing in mind for the entirety of the session. As society shifts in completely new ways, I'm confident that new opportunities will no doubt emerge. And they were going to require us to really reframe the future. But I really believe that in order to define the correct path, organizations are going to need to challenge hard currently held assumptions. So with that, it's a real honor for me to hand over to Khaled, the UNDP Director of the Regional Hub in Amman, to take you through the session. Have a great session. Take care and all the best.
Thank you, Julie. Our next speaker is the Director of the UNDP's established Regional Hub for the Arab States, based in Amman. Please join me in welcoming Khaled Abdel Shafi.
Thanks, Jumana. Distinguished guests, Excellency Jamal bin Hawarib, Ms. Julia Teigland, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and be part of this important conversation that is taking place under the umbrella of UNDP's flagship event on innovation, the Istanbul Innovation Days 2021. At the outset, I'd like to thank Ernst & Young for their partnership in conceptualizing this session, which is grounded in a number of preparatory discussions that have taken place over the past several months with UNDP's innovation community in the Arab states. The topic of today's session, as you know, is accelerating the future of knowledge, is also at the heart of our long-standing collaboration and partnership with Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation, and we are honored today to have His Excellency Jamal bin Hawarib as our keynote speaker today. As you all may know, Istanbul Innovation Days is UNDP's annual research and development event on innovation, a platform for exploring the edges of development work and building partnerships that push the boundaries of the development sector's thinking and doing. This year, it is taking the form of an 8-week program of online events, not about what development is, but what it could be. Events are scheduled through April 20th, and I hope that you can register and attend many of the upcoming sessions. The thematic focus of today's session is the future of knowledge and its role in contributing to resilience in the face of emerging risks and compounded crisis, and ultimately to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. As the current pandemic has made abundantly clear, knowledge is the ultimate cornerstone of resilience, something that enables us to innovate, get ahead of the curve, and foster sustainable development within social and planetary boundaries. To do this, societies need to strengthen their knowledge capacities, specifically their capacities to make sense of fast-changing environments, in particular by being able to collect, analyze, and synthesize new types of data into actionable intelligence. To coordinate across the system, in particular by being able to collaborate across silos, sectors, and disciplines, and to engage with a variety of stakeholders, many of whom are not our usual suspects. And finally, to adapt to future shocks, in particular by being able to better anticipate and act with agility in the face of waves of change that will surely keep coming. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, our development programming in the Arab states has increasingly been informed by the power of collective intelligence and participatory needs of envisaging the future. Our country offices in Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Sudan, Tunisia, and Yemen, just to name a few, have taken up a variety of signals mapping, horizon scanning, and predictive modeling approaches using a multiplicity of data sources, including social media, popular protest songs, and even Friday sermons. At the regional level, in the past months, we have sought to expand the boundaries of the traditional use of knowledge and inspire our programming through a participatory futures exercise involving young people from 15 countries in the region and their imaginings of futures of climate action and civic engagement. Last October, UNDP and EY hosted a workshop with colleagues from several countries to generate insights about the future of knowledge as valuable input for this session. Building on the emerging signals work that our accelerator labs were undertaking, the workshop used EY-inspired Define Your Future methodology to build future scenarios relating to utopia, an ideal transformative state resilient to unknown risks, and dystopia, outlining worst case possible. I'm happy that today we will share a video of the workshop showcasing the reflections of two of our UNDP colleagues on the workshop experience. Amidst all the opportunities, we must also remain mindful of the risks that come with the transition to knowledge societies, not just the risk of exacerbating inequalities within countries, but that of knowledge becoming a neo-colonial tool that sidelines the needs and perspectives of much of the world, as well as undermines personal and community rights and freedoms in the name of data competitiveness. As governments strive to evolve into knowledge-based economies, it is crucial that these journeys are made hand in hand with citizens in order to bridge rather than exacerbate inequalities, but also to harness the benefits of a greater multiplicity of perspectives. Democratizing futures is an important step to building societal trust. I look forward also to hearing the perspectives of our distinguished panelists on this important session, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and I wish you a very fruitful session. Thank you.
Many thanks, Khaled. We're fortunate to have His Excellency Jamal bin Huwairib with us today to deliver the visionary keynote of the session. His Excellency serves as a cultural advisor to the government of Dubai and has been managing the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation since 2013. Welcome, Jamal.
الحضور الكريم، أسعد الله أوقاتكم بكل خير. يسعدني أن أتوجه إليكم من هذا الحدث الذي ينظمه برنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي بالتعاون مع شركة أرنست أند يونغ بهدف تسليط الضوء على أهمية استشراف المستقبل في مختلف القطاعات، لا سيما مجال المعرفة الذي يعد حجر أساس في عملية التنمية المستدامة وفي مرونة المجتمعات لتتمكن من الحفاظ على مكتسباتها في مواجهة مختلف التحديات. السيدات والسادة، تطلق الثورة الصناعية الرابعة موجة من الانفجار الإبداعي، حيث تخلق التقنيات الجديدة أسواقا جديدة وتغير طرق الإنتاج التقليدية، ويقدم الذكاء الاصطناعي والأمن السيبراني والتكنولوجيا الحيوية وسلسلة الكتل سبلا جديدة تمكن الدول من تلبية احتياجات مواطنيها. ويتمثل التحدي الرئيس على المستوى العالمي في ضمان قدرة الدول على استغلال هذه الفرص استغلالا كاملا وتوظيف التحول الرقمي لخلق مستقبل أفضل. وفي ضوء هذه التغيرات تتخذ عملية إنتاج المعرفة والابتكار شكلا جديدا لا مكان فيه للافتراض القائل إن المعلومات والمعرفة والابتكار مكلفة للغاية ويمكن حمايتها بسهولة أسوة ببراءة الاختراع. فمع النمو المضطرد للمعرفة وتوافرها في كل مكان، لم تعد الشركات قادرة على بناء ميزاتها التنافسية على أساس تفرد رأس مالها المعرفي، بل صار لزاما عليها أن تتعلم كيف تستخدم المعلومات في الوقت الحالي لاتخاذ القرارات وتلبية الطلب والاستجابة للعملاء، باعتبار أن القيمة التنافسية الحقيقية للمعرفة باتت تقتصر حاليا على اللحظة التي تنشأ فيها. على الرغم من أن الثورة الصناعية الرابعة توجد فرصا غير مسبوقة، فإنها تخلق أيضا عددا من التحديات أبرزها المهارات المستقبلية. وخلافا للثورات الصناعية السابقة، زادت الثورة الصناعية الرابعة من الطلب النسبي على المهارات بصورة غير متساوية في الوظائف المختلفة، حيث تشكل التكنولوجيا الرقمية عنصرا مكملا للمهام الفكرية في الوظائف ذات الأجور المرتفعة. فالتكنولوجيا تشكل خطرا على العمال الذين يؤدون مهام روتينية في العديد من الوظائف التقليدية ذات الأجر المتوسط. لذلك فإن أحد التحديات الرئيسة التي تواجه صانع السياسات هو إيجاد طريقة لمواجهة عدم الاتساق المتزايد بين المطلوب والمعروض من المهارات، مما يمكن أن يؤدي في حالة عدم معالجته إلى إعاقة النمو الاقتصادي وتهديد الاستقرار الاجتماعي. وهكذا بفضل تحديد المهارات الأساسية للمستقبل ومراقبة جاهزية البلدان لدمج هذه المهارات في خطط مناهجها الدراسية، يمكن تحسين جودة التعليم وتعزيز فرص التعلم مدى الحياة. ونتيجة لذلك سيزداد عدد الشباب والبالغين الذين يمتلكون المهارات اللازمة للعمل، وسيتقلص أثر فجوة المهارات على نسبة الشباب غير الملتحقين بالتعليم أو التوظيف أو التدريب. وهذا من شأنه أن يحقق مزيدا من الإنجازات ضمن هدفي التنمية المستدامة: الرابع جودة التعليم، والثامن العمل اللائق والنمو الاقتصادي. إن الاستثمار في التكنولوجيا وحده لا يكفي لتعزيز تنافسية الاقتصادات واستدامتها، فمع غياب برامج شاملة لتطوير المهارات اللازمة لاستخدام هذه التكنولوجيا ستكون الاقتصادات معرضة لخطر الركود وربما الانهيار في المستقبل القريب. ونحن في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة استطعنا تحقيق هذه المعادلة الصعبة عن طريق العديد من الإنجازات المعرفية من خلال تصميم نظم شاملة ومستدامة مع تنفيذ برامج مبتكرة بشكل جماعي من شأنها زيادة الوعي بمستقبل المهارات والتقنيات، مع تأمين بنية تحتية معرفية مرنة أساسها رأس المال البشري. إن هذا الشغف بالمعرفة والعلوم والاستكشاف مكن دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة من الاحتفال بإنجازها التاريخي المتمثل في إيصال مسبار الأمل بنجاح إلى مدار كوكب المريخ، وتحقيق حلم والدنا المؤسس المغفور له الشيخ زايد بن سلطان آل نهيان، وهو ما يؤكد التزام قيادتنا الرشيدة بدعم المعرفة باعتبارها حجر الزاوية في كل استراتيجية وخطة تضعها الدولة. وكان ذلك أيضا التوجه الذي اعتمدته الإمارات في التخطيط لمعرض إكسبو 2020 الذي تتوق إمارة دبي لاستضافته هذا العام، والذي يعد بتسليط الضوء على أبرز الإنجازات والتطورات التي أحرزها العالم، والتي ستثري معرفتنا وتنير دربنا في مسيرتنا نحو المستقبل. إن مؤسسة محمد بن راشد آل مكتوم للمعرفة، كما هو شأن دولة الإمارات، تؤمن بالمعرفة وقدرتها على إخراج البشرية من أي أزمة، فضلا عن تحسين حياتنا بشكل كبير ووضع البشرية على الطريق الصحيح نحو تحقيق الرفاهية والازدهار والتنمية المستدامة. ومن هذا المنطلق تأتي مبادراتنا كافة بهدف دعم عملية إنتاج ونشر المعرفة واستشراف المستقبل وتعزيز الابتكار وريادة الأعمال المعرفية. وتأتي شراكتنا المستمرة منذ أكثر من عقد مع برنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي تتويجا لهذا النهج، حيث تتمثل رؤية الشراكة بين برنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي ومؤسسة محمد بن راشد آل مكتوم للمعرفة في إلهام ودفع وتوحيد جميع الجهود نحو بناء مجتمعات المعرفة، وذلك من خلال العديد من المنتجات المعرفية المبتكرة، مثل مؤشر المعرفة العالمي الذي يصدر سنويا بهدف قياس البنية التحتية المعرفية للدول. كما تم ابتكار نموذج استشراف مستقبل المعرفة الذي يشير إلى الوعي التكنولوجي والوعي بالمهارات المستقبلية، ويمكننا وصفه بمسار المعرفة المستقبلي، مما يسمح للدول بتقييم وضع بلدانهم حاليا فيما يتعلق بأسس المعرفة الحالية وأين تريد أن تجد نفسها في المستقبل. وخلص التقرير بنسخته الثانية في عام 2019 إلى أن أي من الاقتصادات التي تم تحليلها لم يصل إلى كامل إمكاناته المعرفية أو المرونة المعرفية الكاملة، وهذا يحث على الحاجة إلى الإصلاح والتفكير المستقبلي والمبتكر لتمكين نمو مجتمعات مستدامة ومبتكرة باستمرار، ومن خلال ربط نتائج نموذج استشراف مستقبل المعرفة ونتائج مؤشر المعرفة العالمي بالوضع الحالي. وعلى الرغم من التضامن في مكافحة كوفيد-19 فإن الدول لم تستطع أن تتعامل مع الأزمة بالسرعة والمرونة الكافية لضعف قطاع البحث والتطوير والابتكار، وأيضا لعدم القدرة على خلق المعرفة بصورة أسرع من تطور الجائحة. لقد أوضحنا أن الاستجابة للكوارث هي عملية ديناميكية، وبالتالي يحتاج صانعو القرار إلى تلقي معارف محدثة، ولذلك فإن التأخير في بناء المعرفة والوصول إليها واستخدامها ونشرها سيكون له تأثير سلبي في جودة القرارات وبالتالي في جودة الاستجابة للكوارث. نحن لا نرى اليوم سوى قمة جبل الجليد فيما يتعلق بآثار الثورة الصناعية الرابعة على القدرة التنافسية للبلاد ومواطنيها وطبيعة صناعتها. صحيح أن التقنيات الجديدة تغير العالم الذي نعرفه، ولكن اتجاه هذا التغيير ما زال غير مؤكد. فهل ستسهم هذه التقنيات في خلق مجتمع أكثر شمولا واستدامة، أم إنها ستزيد من عدم المساواة والانقسام الاجتماعي واستقطاب الأفكار؟ الاحتمالان قائمان، ومسار التحول يعتمد إلى حد كبير على ما نفعله اليوم. لذلك فإن الوعي هو الأساس، وعلينا جميعا أن نسعى جاهدين للكشف عن التحولات القادمة في الصناعات والتقنيات الجديدة والتنبؤ بها بشكل أفضل إذا كنا نريد بناء المستقبل الذي نود أن نعمل ونعيش فيه. وأختم كلمتي هذه بكلمة لسيدي صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد آل مكتوم نائب رئيس الدولة رئيس مجلس وزراء حاكم دبي رعاه الله، إذ يقول: إن المستقبل لا ينتظر بل يصنع. شكرا لمساهمتكم في هذا الحدث المعرفي، وشكرا لتفضلكم بالإصغاء، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Prior to today's session, UNDP and EY conducted a workshop looking at different viewpoints, inspirations, and implications for the future of knowledge. The objective of the workshop was to understand how knowledge can be enabled to build resilience. Here to tell us more about the experience is Nada Dimashkiya Sweden, Social and Local Development Program Officer and Youth Focal Point, UNDP Lebanon, and also Ali Muntasir, Head of Experimentation, UNDP Accelerator Lab in Sudan. Nada and Ali, please take it away.
Thank you, Jumana. Start the conversation with, so Nada, just from the film that we just saw and in the Future of Knowledge workshop, you were in the utopian group, right? And I was in the dystopian. How was the general experience? A key takeaway, implementation and knowledge enabler?
Yeah, hi Ali and Jumana, how are you? Indeed, I was in the utopian group and it felt so good, specifically because I imagined the world with no violence. Every person has access to education and health services from the public sector, and people were having meaningful job opportunities. And partners from different sectors were coordinating together for the sake of our environment and our world. And of course, youth and innovation are in the front line in developing solutions to our needs. You know, Ali, the key enablers for the utopian world are investing and funding in research, development, innovation, and biotech to discover more. Knowledge transfers and sharing, and this should include also schools, companies, and communities. Of course, transparency and decentralization, and automation that is paving the way for redefining the job opportunity. How about you, Ali? Can you give us some highlights of the dystopia group?
Of course, but first I have to say, like, the utopian world was really amazing. Ours was not the same way at all. So I'll start by mentioning, like, the dystopian setting felt a bit grim, dark, but not so far from our reality. We can see a lot that is from the dystopian society here today. A key takeaway is the centralization of power within government, the misuse of data, and enforcing power through monitoring individual behaviors. And this also plays into the power dynamics of our communities. While a key implication is the disappearance of natural resources due to improper management. And the last thing is, which is enabler, is cybersecurity risks are high due to centralized dependence on technologies. So as you can see, there's a lot of grim, dark elements there.
Thank you, Ali, for reflecting. And you know, the dystopian world is very similar to the world that we are living in. And this makes me feel so bad. Since I work with the youth, I see that there are so many potential. I see the enthusiasm the youth have for a better future, and I feel so pity that we are unable to perfectly benefit from their potential and to create a utopian world that we all dream of.
Indeed, Nida. So we both did a call for action, by the way. What did the Utopia call for action come up with?
Actually, it should take 3 different levels. It depends on the individual level. We need to create long-term and sustainable thinking systems and behaviors. This should include the new technologies and innovation, of course. At the private sector level, the private sector should encourage transparency, innovation, research, development, and innovation, and co-creation spaces among employees. Moreover, they should really promote corporate social responsibility. It is also significant to encourage linkages with the government, with universities, and other private sectors, and more specifically to encourage partnerships. And the third level is the public sector level that should focus on defining sustainability as a policy-making imperative. They should promote innovation, they should promote, of course, transparency, partnerships, and inclusion in the public institutions. How about you? What were the call for action in the dystopian world?
To be frank, we were a bit different because our world was not as nice, and the utopian world is really great, I have to admit. Ours was more about, for instance, in the individual and society, we're looking at focusing on how do we decolonize and rethinking the knowledge that we have already. We're also looking from the private sector level. We looked at existing level of knowledge and current behavior of private sector and seeing what are the drivers for that and how we can change them. In the public sector, we're looking at like in the awareness aspect, we're looking at how to increase budgets of national and statistical offices and increase trafficking projects. So as you can see, there are a lot of differences between the dystopian setting and the utopian setting. What do you think, Nada?
Honestly, I wish that we all live in a utopian world very soon. I want to see really a strong government, public sector with no corruption and able to provide us as citizens with all the needs. I want to see also the private sector. Of course, they are thinking about their profit and their products, but I want them to think with no harm to our environment. I want them to come up with innovative, sustainable products and solutions that makes our lives easier. But all of this should start with us as individuals. We need to visualize the utopian world and to make sure to start working on that now. Any action should start from us as individuals, and we should make sure to educate youth who are the future of this world to ensure the utopian world visibility. We are the youth focal points at UNDP, Ali, and we are managing the YLP, the Youth Leadership Program. How about doing this Future of Knowledge Utopia Dystopia workshop with the YLP participants to let them feel what we felt, to let them see and visualize the utopian world and also, of course, the dystopian world, and to make sure that they have a call for action to have our utopian world very soon.
I love that idea. Indeed, the youth are the future, and if we include them in this type of knowledge building and looking at the future of knowledge, I think this would be a great idea. And also do be prepared for kind of the dystopian setting where it gets really bad. Great, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nada and Ali, for sharing your experiences with us. Before we wrap up, I would love to hear your final thoughts. Coming out of this experience, how has your concept of knowledge changed, and what do you think about the role of knowledge in society today?
Okay, thank you. This is a tough question too for me. I think this workshop has given me insights into some of the futuristic aspects of how knowledge is currently developed, and if we go down this kind of path, it's going to be a closed path, especially in a dystopian setting, which we were in. And if we cannot, we need to look at finding alternative pathways for developing future knowledges. And we need to look at how we can pluralize that. And this is the main aspect for me that we got from understanding this. Because the dystopian setting is more about what you want to avoid and trying to avoid the things that are happening. So this workshop has given me insights about preparedness, awareness about these things, also looking at what is our role in UNDP, but also how we can support developing various knowledges and how we can look at these alternative pathways. And thank you for that.
Okay, in addition to what Ali highlighted, I want to say that we always tend to blame others, blame the government, blame private sector for not getting what we want. And to be honest, this workshop showed us that actions should be taken not just from the public sector or the private sector. Things should start with us as individuals at the beginning. So the experience that we had, really, it is very important to see how we as individuals should start and make actions in order to have a better world.
Nada, Ali, I'd like to thank you once again for taking the time to share your experience and insights with us today. We're now ready to build on that exchange by diving a bit deeper into today's theme with the much anticipated panel discussion part of our program titled Accelerating the Future. We're now moving on to the panel discussion part of our program, the much anticipated part. Our panel today is titled Accelerating the Future of Knowledge, the future of knowledge as a building block for creating sustainable resilience. In today's rapidly changing world, only economies and societies that have enhanced their preparedness to shocks through effective learning will be able to deal with the increasingly complex, interconnected, and evolving risk landscape. while retaining the ability to seize opportunities to increase overall well-being. Today's session will tackle two main questions. First, what are the possible futures with regards to knowledge, and how can the evolving nature of knowledge contribute to creating resilience in people, communities, and the sustainable development of countries in our future world? We will take a closer look at the roles of technology, globalization, and various stakeholders that are building and reshaping knowledge-based economies in the digital age. I'd now like to officially welcome and introduce our panelists. And we have with us today Leif Edvinsson, Professor Emeritus, University of Lund, Sweden and Hong Kong. Leif specializes in intellectual capital management of enterprises, cities and nations, innovations and future centers. We are also having with us today Nisreen Laham, Regional Project Manager at the International Water Management Institute and futurist as well. Nisreen's areas of expertise include future literacy, food and water security, urban planning, and environmental economics. And last but not least, we have Tariq Al-Olaimi, co-founder and managing director of 3BL Associates. Among Tariq's specializations are sustainability, innovation, biomimicry, and regenerative development. Welcome all to the panel. It's an honor and pleasure to have you all with us today. I'd like to begin by addressing an issue that's on everybody's mind at the moment, one that can't be ignored, and that is the transformative impact of COVID-19 that it's had on governments, businesses, and societies around the world. So the first question I will pose to all of the panelists, how do you think the pandemic has changed the nature and concept of knowledge as we know it? Does anyone want to start by answering the question? Yes.
I can start with this inspiring and intriguing question. In University of Lund, I have a colleague who is working with the subject of functional stupidity. And I think we are seeing that in the situation of COVID. We are adapted for a society with traditional healthcare, but we are not prepared for pandemics. So therefore, we have what he is calling functional stupidity. And that is a big challenge to change the organizations to fit this new fluid world. The other dimension which is in this question is that life science is probably one of the most important subjects of tomorrow, as well as today. And the third one is that it is about speeding up research and development. We see that with the vaccine development, absolutely extraordinary good work to come up with a new vaccine in less than a year. But it also highlights the importance of life science speeding up. And some final dimension on this is that we also had a landing on Mars a month ago, roughly. And that was a long journey, landing on another planet. And this highlights a little bit of the acceleration of the future. I was very happy to drive or participate in a driving license lecture in Washington on how to drive the car on Mars some years back. And now it's reality.
Thank you, Leif. Tariq, what are your views on the question? How do you see knowledge differently today as opposed to pre-COVID times? And what is most important today that we kind of missed the picture about over a year ago?
I appreciate the frame of functional stupidity. I think quite a lot, and I'll also put that in the frame of systems and also the context of now where we're applying knowledge. And that is knowledge in the age of uncertainty. So the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for 2020 was unprecedented, I think, which is a testament to the year of unparalleled uncertainty that we're living through. At the same time, the executive secretary of the UNFCCC, of the UN climate change sort of arm, has come out recently and said that we're very far away from a pathway that will meet the Paris Agreement goal, And we're in a current state of society where we're collectively walking into a minefield blindfolded. And the next step could be a disaster. So actually that's the context of how we're applying knowledge. And I think the pandemic has really been a dress rehearsal for our ability to deal with systemic risks, such as climate change, and this idea of knowledge based on systems thinking. And when I say systems thinking, I mean it's recognizing the feedback loops between our different systems, whether climate systems, economic systems, or patriarchal systems. It's about redefining interconnections within those systems. It's about changing the rules that govern societies fundamentally overnight and trying to increase the number of people who are problem solvers. And I think that these will be some of the most important skills of the future, and that actually where we've tried to invest in knowledge in the last year has really been in trying to respond to this need of systems thinking, of trying to do something that actually our systems literature and our knowledge management processes are not always very well set out to do, which is really be able to provide this architecture of how different silos of knowledges can come together and really engage with such a system which is transforming so rapidly and which is in the context of very deep and continuing uncertainty, particularly in achieving the SDGs.
And Nasreen, sticking with the same topic, from your perspective, you're operating out of the Middle East. So how has our definition of knowledge changed in this part of the world, and how are we changing things to become more agile and prepared for the future?
Yeah, actually, while there are many lessons learned from the pandemic, the most important one appears to be being adequately prepared for the future. At a basic level, this means not just having the ability to read emerging issues and weak signals, but also being able to rapidly respond to these signals. After the pandemic, preparedness for future shocks is now more addressed in the agenda of policymakers. Scientists' research on alternative futures and modeling is attracting also more attention. Interdisciplinary research, as mentioned by Tariq also, and knowledge of interdependencies between different sectors and the whole value chain for securing food, for example, is an issue also on the top agenda for discussions on different platforms. The rural-urban links also, all these are topics that are now discussed more often on national and regional platforms. Innovative approaches have resulted out of this, such as urban agriculture and using hydroponics, for example. This is also has much more attention after the pandemic, and also securing our scarce water resources in the MENA region by using only 90% as water requirement for this agriculture. This is in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. A lot has been said throughout the last year as COVID has been impacting all of us around the world. A lot has been said about digital transformation. Now, mostly we've understood this to be a positive thing. We have, as a result of COVID, we have shifted to digital platforms. We're becoming a lot more efficient. We're using knowledge and tools in new ways. So it's mostly been positive. However, I think there's one important thing that we are missing. So we tend to forget that the world is not, countries and economies around the world are not created equal. There are societies that have advanced digital infrastructure, and then there are societies that do not have the same access. So this has created a skills and knowledge gap. So what I wanted to ask all of the panelists is, what would you say are the most effective ways to build knowledge capacity that addresses the digital divide and drive sustainable development in the region?
I might start as I did on the other question. I do think that there is a fundamental understanding that is important that we in the Western world are lacking. And in the Western world, I was educated in Berkeley, California. We started to think about knowledge as an object. But the more you go to the East, the more you realize that knowledge is a relationship and it's a flow. And given that, how do you make a library of a flow? How do you make a library of relationships? And that has fundamental implications for how you organize for it. And I think the digital platform development is extremely interesting, especially if you link it to neuroscience. And the neuroscience helps you by developing questions that impact your amygdala, for example, and how your endorphins are produced. So if I ask you, Yunama, how's your endorphins right now?
I would not be able to answer that.
But I can see that you are reacting in a very good way. You are smiling, and it's a part of the endorphins. Your smile in your face.
Positively.
So the neuroscience has lots to add to our reality of tomorrow. But remember, it is not an object knowledge. It's a relationship. And that's why we have a different competition with Asia, as they see the development in relational terms rather than object terms.
Nisreen, do you want to chime in on this question, offer your perspective in terms of knowledge, access to technology, and the digital divide? How does this region compare? Because the countries in the region are quite diverse when it comes to their access and their level of advancement in terms of access to technology and knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. It's not harmonized region. I'm talking about the Arab region, of course. But I can say that the fourth industrial revolution holds prospects for the Arab region as a whole to benefit from new opportunities brought by new digital technologies, promoting knowledge creation, innovation, skill intensification of the workforce, and productivity enhancement. For sure, education plays a critical role in building capacity for development in the digital economy. Participation in the digital economy requires new managerial and technical skills to stimulate technological learning and facilitate cooperation and collaboration. Also, education increases the country's stock of capital essential for building capacity for innovation and supporting sustainable development. In other words, education drives knowledge creation, technological breakthrough, and new product development. So there's a need to focus, especially in the low-income countries and countries with low education levels for the youth and children to enhance the knowledge input on innovation, on creative thinking, critical thinking for the children. We have to start from the childhood, from the children at school, to have a future generation with this way of thinking, new way of thinking, to be prepared for a different future that we live now.
Tariq, any thoughts on this specific topic of digital divide and how we can move forward better in the future?
Yes, I'll actually focus very specifically on the GCC, I think, as a region. And I think one of the most effective ways to build knowledge capacity is an answer that we've known for many years, which is to invest in the human capital of the national population. And I think it's really interesting to look at the context of the pandemic, where we have estimates that the current recession has caused actually an expat exodus. The population across the GCC has contracted around 4%, with actually the sharpest decline in Dubai. And what's even more interesting for me is that I don't think our current labor market models actually include forecasts adequately for expat outflows related to things like climate risks that I spoke to before. So it's a real question of how many expats would actually continue to stay if you added 15% taxation, if you added substantial life-threatening, heat stress, or sea level rise risks. So when I think about the GCC context in the long term, from productivity to income levels to economic diversification, all will stagnate without that significant investment in human capital from a perspective of the national population. Now, when it comes to the context of the fourth industrial revolution, what I would add is it is particularly important to invest in women and in youth. And I think with AI and fast-paced digitization, job opportunities for women are set to double. I think across the board, and I think it's still true for the region by 2030, according to the ILO, and that even when it comes to the MENA region and the Gulf in particular, automation is predicted to only negatively impact 15% of women. So actually that means it's creating far more opportunities than it is taking away. Yet at the same time, we look at the stats and where investment is being done, women in MENA are still underrepresented when it comes to digital platforms. And there's only 28% of women online in MENA versus 44% globally. There's that digital divide and gap when it comes to gender, and also one that we need to bridge with respects to national populations as well for I think really a sustainable future.
Yeah, what Tariq said was extremely interesting, and you could add to that modern neuroscience have managed, at least in Sweden, to picture by image development the flow in the brain, and it's different between male and female brain. And that will probably also add to the future in an interesting way. The male way of processing in the brain is very straightforward like this, while the female processing of the neurons is going that way. And that makes it very interesting to think about what we said earlier, the collaboration between brains, but also going one step back. And how do we learn to think? And I think what's happening in what is a heritage of GCC is actually that you have a remarkable heritage of thinking going way backwards, long before we were talking about computers. And furthermore, if you translate computer into, for example, Chinese, it's not a computer. In French, it's called ordinateur, which keeps that you get the numbers in a correct order. In Chinese, it's electrical mind. So where do you have your electrical mind? Is it the male one or is it the female one? So the heritage of GCC gives you a very good springboard potential. And it's also seen in the statistics that we have done for national intellectual capital of some 60 countries. And UAE is doing very well, for example.
Very interesting point you bring up, especially considering that we tend to think that more technology and more digitalization will make us all the wiser, but we also become very reliant on these tools to do our thinking for us. So it seems like we need to kind of rethink that concept a bit. Nasreen, I'm going to pose the next question to you because it falls in line with your expertise. So it seems that today what we've realized is that there are so many more literacies that are much more important and needed in today's world, such as future literacies, digital literacy, data literacy, and media literacy, just to name a few. What do you think needs to be done, Nasreen, to bring societies up to speed on this? And, you know, we can cover everything from government and policy to education. What do you think about this?
Yeah, thank you for this question, and thanks for bringing in futures literacy, which I would like to focus on. Part of foresight or futures literacy is understanding how we may address or take advantage of challenges and opportunities. It also involves highlighting potential innovations, the scope for scaling them, and determining the missing innovations needed to enhance our future resilience. Foresight being defined as a systematic participatory process involving future intelligence can inform present-day decisions and mobilize joint actions. Hence, it can contribute to improving anticipatory intelligence and an increased awareness of knowledge resources and strategic orientations of the actors' participatory in foresight activities. The importance of foresight stems from looking into the possible of different futures using different foresight methodologies. This provides a window to build our knowledge on what is driving change, driving forces, what we call, and what leverage we have in shaping the future. Actually, there's a need to develop our capacities in futures literacy or foresight on society level for all disciplines. This starts by enhancing our imagination capabilities. which should start from the childhood. In the Arab region, I can say we are more attracted to the past rather than to the future. We have to train our children to imagine all probable futures and anticipate what we call wild cards or weak signals, which are events that have very low probability to happen, but when occurring, they have tremendous impacts. Of course, like such as COVID-19, the Arab Spring, economic shock, and other events. In that way, we may enhance our preparedness for probable futures. And here I recommend to include foresight in schools' curriculums to be able to have a future generation with futures knowledge and foresight skills to anticipate the future and to be prepared for it. And through this, we may enhance our sustainable resilience for future shocks. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen, for sharing your thoughts on that. Life, I wanted to pose the next question to you. So it looks like in recent decades, there have been certain events, major events that have happened that kind of have shifted us towards progress and adopting technology in a very transformative way. You know, in the 90s and 2000s, we had the emerging the rise of the internet, which became a part of their lives, which was it changed the way we live and work on a daily basis. Now with COVID, it kind of went into another gear. So what would you say have been the major drivers of change in recent decades, and how do you see the future looking like at the moment?
I'm very intrigued by this question, and I would like to bring up what Nisreen was referring to. We have to learn the kids to think in a new way. And I learned that as a student in California. The first semester, I didn't get very good grades. So I went to my professors and told them what's wrong with my responses. And then they said, well, you are just recycling old stuff by responding to the question. So what you should do as a student is to take the question and rephrase it and challenge me as a teacher. And that was a mindset that actually led to the culture of Silicon Valley at that time. So we have to learn to think in a much more progressive way. And that's why I'm very positive. Right now, I'm involved in a project in Holland about the future of water and things like that. And it's based on that we observe that the youngsters have a kind of gloomy outlook. They don't believe in the future. And the more gloomy reports we get from various so-called experts, they miss the other positive dimension, that we have never been able to see into our brains, into our human body, to develop new vaccines in life science. This is a remarkable situation right now. So we are trying to develop positive cartography in Holland in a project. What kind of maps should we present and have a dialogue with the youngsters about? And we call it positive cartography, the maps with a positive outlook for their future. I'm not young enough to be in the future, but I'm on the edge. Like the very good unit you have in Ernst & Young, EDGE, with John Seeley Brown and John Hagel. A remarkable outfit you have there.
Life, a follow-up question for you. What would you say is missing at this point? What will be needed to achieve a more progressive and preferable future of knowledge?
We should probably look into the learning from Leonardo da Vinci. And he had a saying called saper vedere. And saper vedere is learning to see. And long before we had X-ray systems, he was looking and drawing about how the human body looks like inside. So we have to apply some of that thinking, learning to see. And there is so much to see and observe, and most of it is positive. But we have also neuroscience saying a negative news has roughly 8 times longer impact than a positive one. And it stays in your mind, a negative one stays longer than a positive one. So we are balancing between the neuroscience and the need for positive news, positive maps, positive organizations, and coming back to your endorphins in your smile.
Very fascinating life. A lot of what we digest at the moment is negative, unfortunately. Information overload, social media, the media cycle, focusing on negative stories. So it's really important, I agree with you, that we get back to basics and start to rethink concepts. Tariq, my next question is for you. What would you say are the necessary investments and capabilities needed to leverage knowledge properly and build resilience and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals?
It's a question that's very close to my heart, and I think I'll build on what's been shared previously now in terms of the relational domains, and also dealing with some of these more difficult moments around, I think, social media, burnout, etc. And I'd like to do this through touching upon some of the work that I actually do with one of my ventures, which is called Recipes for Wellbeing, where we've actually supporting social impact leaders and organizations to cultivate both their individual and collective well-being, because we know that when they thrive, they then become more effective in their outer work to achieve the SDGs. I'd say, unfortunately, we've seen 800% increase in demand for our services in the past year, because COVID not only is a threat to people's physical health, but it shatters mental well-being, emotional, and also spiritual resilience. And I think what this past year has really emphasized for us is the importance of investing in our skills around well-being as a way to build resilience, because well-being is actually a skill that must be practiced every day. It is an index of many embodied and learnable actions and behavior, one of which is also how do you digitally discern as well all the social media that's coming to you. And that we found that the more successful organizations that we've been working with, who are working on SDG issues, are the ones who have actually very consciously invested in their organizational knowledge around well-being. Both to provide their employees and their communities with the right mix of tools, of policies, of community care structures, of learning experiences that are then able to meet the particular well-being needs of each person, of each team, and also really to hold the space for everything that people have been going through. And we don't often think of things such as, there's the skill of digital discernment, there's the skill of dealing with uncertainty, there's also the skill of grieving for the future. So for all the people in the UN who had all these incredible projects and events that they planned, which they now needed to let go of, actually there's a lot to grieve as well when it comes to that and letting go of that. And I find that indeed this is on the relational domain, on the resilience domain, that sphere of holistic well-being is, I think, one of the most important things we need to invest in.
Yes, Tara, I think you're certainly right when you say that, in this post-COVID state we're in, we had to give up a lot of things. We had to put things on hold. We kind of had to focus on the bottom line and be in survival mode instead of having the luxury to innovate and encourage and focus on well-being. I mean, look at us, we're all here virtually. We're all working from home, most of us. And that sounds fantastic, but in reality, we have a lot of, it's almost as if we have more pressure, less focusing and relying on technology all the time. Can't be a healthy thing. And we lost a lot of human interaction along the way. So yeah, something to think about for the future. Nisreen, next question is for you. Looking at the Arab world specifically, what are the mega trends that you are seeing right now? And what are the key factors driving these mega trends? Focusing on the trends which you see are the most important in terms of driving knowledge and sustainable development.
Yeah, actually, during my leadership to the Foresight Studies Forum for Africa and the Middle East, or FSF, we conducted a series of newsletters entitled North Africa Horizons, where we scanned the main future trends identified as critical for the future of the Arab world and drivers for these trends. One of these trends being the future of millennials, in addition to other trends like water scarcity, urban slums, and food security. The two key drivers of these themes are really demographic shifts, rapid population growth coupled with rapid urbanization. Rapid population growth has not only increased demand for food and thus water, but more importantly, also produced a true segment of young people born between the mid-80s and 2000, otherwise referred to as millennials, who were starting to change the society in a very significant way, with the Arab Spring being the calling card. However, the future could be very different with the millennial preparing for the future leadership. Throughout our research studies, we found that millennials are proving as resilient in finding solutions as they are undermining old order. They are driving social innovations to address age challenges and create new opportunities. But in order to tap the millennials' energy, we need to promote social entrepreneurship and volunteerism business models. Besides education, we come also to education another time. It's a key driver. What is needed in this regard is focusing on education, increasing for building capacity for innovation and supporting sustainable development, as education can drive knowledge creation, technological breakthrough, and new product development, as I also mentioned before. Thank you.
Nasreen, a follow-up question related to this question. You spoke about the energy and the entrepreneurial spirit of the youth in the Arab world. We know there's so much potential. The youth doesn't always get the opportunities that they deserve and reach their full potential. You know, all the countries are very diverse. So we have like the UAE, which is a hub for startups and entrepreneurs, and other countries in the GCC are emulating this as well. But we do know like countries like Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, even North Africa offers tremendous potential. So I would ask you, what role do you see innovation playing in this next phase of development for the Arab world?
Actually, innovation could be the catalyst for change. As I mentioned, the millennials has this energy, has this potential for changing. But how can we enhance their creativity and their input? How they can benefit from all this energy? The Arab world, even Egypt, Lebanon, or all these countries that are behind in the innovation ranking, I can say, on world level. But there are the potential. The potential is there. It's a rich region. We are really rich, and with the human resources we have, the thinking, when some children from Egypt go to the USA or abroad, they are really creative and they can do. But it's the responsibility of the government, the responsibility of the private sector to work with the government, and for the thinkers with all entrepreneurship to empower the youth, to empower them and give them the opportunity to manifest their energies and their input in innovation. So there's a great challenge, but the energy is there, and all the capacities are there as well.
Life. The next question I'm going to pose to you. How would you say past concepts of knowledge how are those past concepts of knowledge that we spoke about earlier in discussion, how is that changing the way we envision the knowledge of the future? And what would you say are the best examples, real life examples we can reference of where knowledge is heading in the right direction?
So let's start on Mars right now. So we take a quick jump and a long jump to Mars, and then you realize that we are soon going to land human beings there. But we cannot land it without the technology. So the technology becomes a multiplier for the human potential. And this is a fundamental dimension for the navigation. It's a multiplier function where you multiply human capital or human talent with structural capital. And the difference is that structural capital is working 24 hours a day for you. The human capital will not work 24 hours a day. The human capital should work about 4 hours per day, according to medical research. So structural capital works 6 times more. So if you want to leverage the economics, You have to combine and multiply. And as Nasreen said, the catalyst. But the catalyst might be in understanding that the meaning of the word entrepreneur is French, and it means entreprendre. Take the space in between. And the space in between both the human capital and the structural capital has a lot of wonderful potentials. So we have to work with the entrepreneurship, both on the traditional company level, but we have to do it on societal level. And societal innovation and societal entrepreneurship. And it looks like that the pattern shows and indicate that it is small countries that are the most successful ones in driving the future well-being of combining human capital and structural capital to the benefit of many. But basically, you could say that it is the multiply function of human capital and structural capital. Remember that structural capital works 24 hours a day, human capital 4 hours a day. And if you combine them in a smart shape, you will get the turbo effect of similar to going to Mars. And we can learn from, among others, Japan there. They have a concept called BA. In Belgium, they call it SPA. So therefore, you actually learn to go into this shape of a BA. I called it future center. So I developed future centers in Sweden, and now there are about 100 such in Japan. It's a special kind of relational turbo for the human beings. And we can talk about that later on. But it is actually to work with the space in between, and it's called BA. And you can Google on it, find information about it, especially Professor Noboru Kono has been working on it.
You brought up an interesting point, Leif, about human capital and structural capital and how we are rethinking that and allocating that to kind of develop new solutions. So sticking with that, Tariq, I wanted to ask you, developing new strategies and solutions that are related to knowledge to solve modern day challenges, of course, that's what we need to do. It's important, it has to get done. But how do we actually measure the impact of that investment in learning and knowledge, especially considering there are so many things that are intangible?
So I think it's a great question. I think there's a longer answer around yields and ESG indicators and different impact measures. But I think particularly around the intangible, I'd like to answer this from that systems perspective that I spoke to earlier, and also actually Leif's comment around negative news staying with us 8 times as longer. And I think that a global leadership challenge that we face is a transition from a culture of unintended consequences to a culture of recurring and cascading benefits. So what do I mean as an example of unintended consequences? It relates to what we mentioned earlier in this panel, which relates to social media platforms. There's fake news, particularly in looking at how algorithms have shaped elections and generational decisions, which have been made in countries based on misinformation and incorrect application of knowledge. For the millennials and Gen Zs watching this, there's a meme that went out, I think, in January, showing the domino effect of a person starting a directory of a university student from his dorm room, which is basically Facebook, all the way to the insurrection that happened in the US Capitol, and the many dominoes of negative and actually completely unintended consequences in these spaces in between. And I think part of how we need to start thinking about measuring the impact of our investments in learning and knowledge is asking, does it actually create positive reinforcing feedback loops? Does it create continual benefits and positive value across the system? Or does it create all these unintended and negative side effects across the system, where, for example, you have the same misinformation architecture that was being used around elections in some countries, now being used, that same architecture now being used to spread misinformation about masks and vaccines. And for me, that's a negative impact, and actually what a positive impact looks like when we start measuring investments is, within a system, does it create all these positive feedback loops? Do you actually see the positive value chain across a system?
Ms. Sireen, I'd like to kind of delve into the concept of systems thinking, because that's one of the things that you're focusing on in your work at the moment. So how could systems thinking and futures knowledge inform our decisions better today? And if you can just share a few examples from the important work that you're doing.
Yeah, actually, as we face increasing levels of complexity and uncertainty, we must take a systemic view of our future. When we start focusing on systems, we will have a better, more complete understanding of what possibilities might emerge next. During my work for GIZ and my current work with EMI, I experienced the interrelationships between the different sectors, such as water, energy, and food, and how a decision in one sector could have impacts on other sectors. This is where modeling and trade-offs between different policies and decisions could be the base for informed decisions, considering future impacts and taking it into consideration and enhancing our preparedness to risks and shocks such as climate change. We know that climate change will have impacts on water availability in the future and hence on food security. In this regard, we have to do the trade-offs and we have to take a decision. Shall we look for food sufficiency or in the region, or shall we preserve our precious water resources, which will decrease in the future, and import food products with the embedded water used for planting it, or what we call virtual water? Some countries in the region, like Egypt, for instance, has taken a decision to limit or control planting rice to conserve its scarce water resources. I may say also that after COVID-19, preparedness for future shocks is also more addressed in the agenda of policymakers, and this interdisciplinary research and knowledge of interdependencies between different sectors and the whole value chain for securing food, for example, also is much more on the agenda of policymakers. Another example I can give is on wastewater, which is an untapped opportunity in the region, as it is the only resource that increases with the population increase in the region. And in addition of being an alternative source of water for agriculture, wastewater can enhance also water availability and decrease energy demand for fertilizers, as it contains nutrients and enhance agricultural production and food security levels. So all these sectors have to be handled in a systemic way, studying the interrelationships and trade-offs between the sectors, and also the relation with the environment and with the resources we have, the land, the water, and also taking into consideration the climate change impacts in the future. So it's a must, systems thinking regarding these three major sectors, and which are related to the major challenges the Arab region is facing.
Yes, and it's a known fact that some of the world's most innovative solutions were actually developed during times of crisis. So the question I want to pose to Tariq and Life is, what is the impact of crises on knowledge, and what do you see as the silver linings in our current situation, or areas of potential that will drive knowledge and progress in the near future?
If I may start, I think what we heard from Nisreen is extremely interesting. I just want to give a comment there. Jay Forrester, professor in Boston at MIT, developed a whole systems dynamics platform. So I really recommend you to have a look at World Dynamics from Jay Forrester. And it's about the interrelationships and the interdependencies that you mentioned. And out of that, we developed an accounting system in Germany called Wissenskapital, which is knowledge capital. So you can actually start to see the interdependencies of components of knowledge leading to welfare and the future. And this is probably one of the leading dimensions in accounting systems in the world. It was picked up by Japan and developed in Japan, and now China is doing it as well from Japan. But we in the Western world are still looking upon knowledge as a cost. The more we invest in, the worse the balance sheet will be from an accounting viewpoint. So it's a remarkable paradox in the accounting system that we have to turn around. And this leads to that the big question that we are just talking about now is that knowledge is a flow. And this flow has to be measured in the same way as the longitude. And the longitude is a third dimension. You have altitude, you have latitude, and longitude is the one in between. And why is it that way? Because the Earth is rotating. And the Earth is rotating with quite a high speed. It's roughly 1,600 kilometers per hour, which means that it's impossible to stand still. But the more we do the accounting, the more we stand still, actually. So therefore, we have to change the whole paradigm of metrics to longitude 3D. And that is precisely what you said, systems dynamics or system thinking and systems view, systemic view. And that's why the issue of crisis is a myth. It's a myth that which we started with a few minutes ago, talking about knowledge as something negative. It's a positive dimension, it's a flow, and if it is not flowing, you are dead.
Thank you, Leif. Tariq, do you have any thoughts on the topic of crisis and its impact on knowledge? Has COVID changed the way organizations are thinking about investing in research and innovation and knowledge, or are we still focused on short-term profits as our priority?
So I'd actually like to talk about this from the perspective of the UN decade of ecosystem restoration, which we've sort of just started. And the reason for that is I think the biggest area of potential that I see is in nature-based knowledge. I think that is the source of our greatest bank of wisdom. And it's an approach that a certain Leonardo da Vinci also took in his designs and philosophy. And my own background is in the field of biomimicry, which is a practice of trying to create a more sustainable world by emulating nature's designs and core principles. And at its core, it acknowledges that nature has had 3.8 billion years of research and development, the cost equivalent of which humans replicating is incomparable, and that actually through nature's own knowledge architecture of DNA, nature has already achieved the SDGs. Nature has already solved many of the problems humans are already grappling with. Animals, plants, microbes are the world's best engineers, physicists, architects, designers. And I think where I've seen a shift, particularly when it comes to zoonotic disease, and one that really puts our relationship with nature at its forefront. I've seen a shift of really, it's not only just the need to focus on AI, but also on BI, biological intelligence. And this means that it's not only just conserving nature, but it's actually learning from nature's immense library of knowledge and applying those principles across every industry. And I take this approach as well personally because it's something in which through the different crises, or rather evolutions of the Earth, spanning billions of years, from the asteroids to the ice ages to pandemics, really this wisdom of nature is a repository of how life has actually survived, thrived, and what are the design principles that we need to build our organizations based off on, and our solutions based off on, which is obviously not a profit-centric model, but really a model which is really able to create conditions conducive to thriving for all communities and species. So yeah, I really think this is our greatest potential, and I think it's one with the UN decade of ecosystem restoration and this focus on future knowledge we must really be able to marry together and really deepen.
Thank you for that, Tariq. Nisreen, we discussed earlier about the digital divide and how we can address that issue with knowledge, but there are still so many other pressing issues facing our societies around the world, such as gender gaps, unequal access to education, and growth opportunities. So how would you say we can utilize knowledge to build more inclusive societies, I would say, over the next decade?
Yeah, actually, in this regard, intersectionality has to be addressed, as multiple factors often lead to a combination of disadvantages. The interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race, class, and gender, given to individual or group, create overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Given the complex, multidimensional nature of discrimination, there is a need for a holistic response that considers the overlaps between different types of deprivation. Evidence data is certainly needed. We must examine why people are left behind, empower those people, and endorse change through policies, reforms, and other interventions. National capacities should be strengthened, expanding opportunities for civil society and building local governance systems that reduce inequality and exclusion.
Thank you, Nisreen. I'd like to kind of wrap things up by asking all of our panelists today for their final thoughts on the topic of accelerating the future of knowledge. In your view, if we had to break it down in a nutshell and say we need to do these 3 or 4 things, we need to achieve these goals in the next 10, 15 years, what would those be? And I will start with Lai.
I would be addressing 3 things. Learn to navigate, not to manage. Manage is a French word which means that you put a hand on the shoulder. Most people don't like that. And therefore, we have to go to navigation and understand the longitude dimension that I mentioned earlier. The second one is we have to learn to prototype, and that is to reduce the risk and fear of going into the future, because most people are afraid of the future. Very few, it's roughly between 3 and 5% are prepared to go into the future. The rest, 95%, are afraid of it. So how do you reduce the fear? And that is done by, among others, prototyping, like Leonardo was doing. And for that, we need an organizational setup that I call Future Center, or BA in Japan. And that is a space where you can do the experiment. And we need that not only for cooperation, we need it for nations, for the political development of regions, like the GCC. So where will you find those new setups? It could perhaps be a chain of pop-ups as Future Center. And that leads to a final remark that value chain is a question and an approach of the past. Now we have a value galaxy where you combine the different components for navigating into the future. And that is much more demanding. And as Nasreen was saying, it's the interdependencies. Value change is one-dimensional stupidity.
Tariq, any final thoughts on the topic?
Yes, I really think the future of knowledge is wisdom in this age of uncertainty, and it's the wisdom of applying knowledge within the human and non-human systems that we're a part of. And actually something that you both said, Jaman and Nasreen, in relation to millennials actually made me think of a quote from Maria Popova, who's the founder of the website Brain Pickings, which I love, where she says, we want to have the knowledge, but not do the work of claiming it. Meaning, we rely on external sources indeed to do our thinking for us. As you had mentioned, we live in a world of TikToks that can amazingly summarize 500-page books and manifestos into 2-minute videos, which we still want to skip through and get to the end. So it's not only about just consuming and creating knowledge, but having that wisdom of still being able to contemplate, to reflect, and embody ourselves the knowledge that is being presented to us. And I have a lot of great faith in this new generation that they're doing the work to claim that knowledge and really embody that knowledge.
Thank you, Tariq. Nisreen, key takeaways that all the audience should hear in terms of knowledge and how it's changing for the future.
We need to work around the usual silos. The totality of disaggregated evidence and information will need to be considered together to recognize patterns and to fill essential gaps in data, financing, and capacities. Evidence-based research and intersectional approaches could be used to map deep-rooted also gender power inequalities, for instance, that shape this issue. So this is in a nutshell what I shall add to what has been said. I will not replicate what has been said by others. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. I will just add my final thoughts as well. For me, this whole experience, the disruption we've seen over the last year has made us focus on a few things that are really important, lessons to keep in mind for the future. One, we need to, as Live said earlier, we need to go back to basics. We need to rethink and reassess our priorities. We need to go back and come up with new solutions for education. We need to look at the existing issues and decide what's most important for now. What are the things that we need to invest in terms of research and to solve the issues of tomorrow and to become more prepared. So preparedness is linked with competitiveness, and there's no way around that. And finally, I would just say that the race to drive knowledge and drive sustainable development has no finish line. It's a continuous journey that we all have to keep dedicating our efforts to. On that note, I wanted to thank all of the panelists for taking part in today's insightful discussion. It was definitely thought-provoking, and it definitely changed the way we think about knowledge and its role in driving sustainable development in the Arab world. So thank you all so much for taking part.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy future.
Thank you so much.
Today we learned so many important lessons along the way from the Dubai session of Istanbul Innovation Days, which I'm sure all of our audience members can take home with them. First and foremost, we identified the connection between knowledge resilience and sustainable development. Using COVID as a prime example, we gained a new appreciation for knowledge as a tool and mechanism to prepare for future global crises and for building resilience and driving sustainable development in the future. We put the spotlight on pressing issues such as gender equality, people with disabilities, and the digital divide as major issues that we should be addressed and incorporated into future policies, as well as solutions that can ensure that no one is left behind. The world of work will continue to change as a result of COVID, and the transformation in knowledge and technology is making all of that possible. We examined the role of knowledge from the perspective of utopian and dystopian futures and reevaluated our priorities as societies and citizens of the world. Finally, we looked at concepts such as future literacy and digital literacy, and we explored better ways that we can collaborate and leverage knowledge to build resilient societies and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Tomorrow, we continue our discussion with the San Francisco session of Istanbul Innovation Days, where we will turn our attention to the future of technology partnerships as we explore the role of data transformation in building a data and tech-driven future world. This session will feature an impressive lineup of speakers, including UNDP's Chief Digital Officer, Robert Opp, and Adlai Goldberg, who is EY's Global Digital, Social, Commercial Innovation, Life Sciences Leader. So make sure that you all tune in for that event. On behalf of UNDP and EY, I'd like to thank all of our speakers and panelists who made today's event a big success, as well as everyone who attended the virtual session. We look forward to another great session tomorrow. Have a nice day.